Change for Rare. Wissen verbinden, Perspektiven schaffen.
Herzlich willkommen bei Change for Rare. Ich bin Dierks, Fachanwalt, Facharzt. An der Charité kümmere ich mich um Gesundheitssystemforschung und habe die spannende Aufgabe, Sie durch Perspektiven, Insights und Diskussionen zu seltenen Krankheiten, sogenannten Orphan Diseases, zu führen. Mit der Initiative Change for Rare will Alexion das Wissen um die Versorgung von Patienten mit seltenen Krankheiten bündeln und zugänglich machen. Denn noch immer warten Patienten mit einer seltenen Krankheit rund 5 Jahre auf die korrekte Diagnose. Noch immer stehen nur wenigen Patienten mit seltenen Krankheiten geeignete Medikamente zur Verfügung. Um Wissen zu verbinden und Perspektiven zu schaffen, führe ich 8 Gespräche mit Experten zum Thema ACCESS, ökonomische Grenzen und Gerechtigkeit bei der Versorgung von Patienten mit seltenen Krankheiten. Tauchen Sie ein in die Perspektiven von Recht, Kassenärztlicher Vereinigung, Arzneimittelhersteller Ethik, Patientenperspektive, medizinische Wissenschaft, Krankenkasse und Gesundheitsökonomik. It is a special challenge to invest into research when the number of patients that will benefit from a medicinal product is relatively small. The company faces not only the risk of research failure, also of an economical loss if the return on investment cannot be realized. Yet still, some companies take on that challenge. The expert Camilla Harder Hartvig will give us insights into this field of endeavor, the need to invest into research and development, as well as market entry, and will share her perspective on access for orphan drugs. Now, Camilla Harder Hartvig is a Senior Vice President and Head of International at Alexion Pharmaceuticals. She's leading the company's international commercial operations and managing the regional functions at the international headquarters based in Zurich, Switzerland. Camilla, you are responsible for the international business, and with this, you have insight into different healthcare systems. What is your perspective on access for rare disease therapies when you compare Germany with other countries?
So, first of all, it's really nice to be here, and it's great to be part of this interview and discuss something that is obviously very close to my heart in the role that I have in Alexion as heading up the international business. So, literally, the German system has many benefits, such as the immediate access and full reimbursement of a therapy for patients after EMA regulatory approval, which leads not only to fast access, but also broad availability of new, innovative treatment options for our patients. And a recent study actually of 54 orphan drugs that were launched between the time of 2015 to 2018 found that 94% of these drugs were available in Germany. And this number is significantly, unfortunately, lower in most other European countries in comparison. So the process of assessing therapies via the MNOC is well defined and follows very strict timelines, which ensures pharmaceutical companies have a very predictable, absolutely framework to work within. And in the MNOC framework, orphan drugs are automatically considered to have an added benefit as they do serve patient populations that previously did not have appropriate treatment or where there is a relevant unmet medical need. In comparison to MNOC, in other European countries, there is often a relatively lengthy reimbursement process and unpredictability and sometimes major delays that results in patients needing to wait for years before they have access to a new therapy. This is critical in rare diseases when most therapies are first-of-a-kind treatment. So more needs to be done for sure to ensure that reimbursement systems offer equitable access and that new treatments can in fact reach patients.
Let me ask one step further. Do you see any special challenges when it comes to market access for orphan therapies?
Honestly, traditional health technology assessments are not designed to effectively or fairly assess the value of a given therapy for rare disease. So again, more needs to be done to ensure assessments take into consideration the uniqueness of orphan drugs, such as the small size of the patient populations, but also the general lack of validated assessment tools for rare and ultra-rare diseases, as well as a lack of alternative therapies upon which to base any comparative evaluation. So aligning clinical trials conducted primarily for global regulatory purposes with the specific requirements of national payers or HTA bodies around the world, each of which are having their own framework and criteria, is not easy. And in many instances, a specific endpoint or assessment instrument may be acceptable in one country only and therefore not in another. And the same applies to comparator treatments across countries, treatment standards, and clinical practice. So the process by which health technology assessment agencies evaluate medicines varies hugely between countries, leading to very different outcomes of assessments for the exact same drug. So we need to recognize the challenges identified in demonstrating the value of therapies for orphan diseases and that they require a different process to standard HTA approaches. So we must strike a balance and ensure that new treatments are made available to patients safely, but also, honestly, as quickly as possible.
Thank you. Let us take a look now, if you may, at the time after marketing authorization. Should real-world evidence play a role in the assessment of orphan drugs?
Absolutely. So at the time of regulatory approval, the available evidence might still be limited. And due to the urgent need for a treatment option, some orphan medicines do receive conditional approval. And in these cases, or when there are other major uncertainties, it could be beneficial to collect more evidence in a real-world setting. Clinical studies do measure the efficacy of a therapy. So to understand its effectiveness, data needs to be collected in clinical practice. Registries are one option to strengthen the evidence base and understand the full value of a new treatment for patients and the healthcare system. It is important that the setup and that the approach to data collection do not pose a too high burden on treating physicians and patients and focuses therefore on those aspects that are most relevant. And there should also be alignment between the manufacturer and the health authorities on the exact scope of the data collection.
Now, from your perspective, you obviously have a very detailed insight into what happens on the EU level. What are your impressions concerning European incentives to develop and market orphan drugs?
So, the EU orphan drug legislation that was introduced 20 years ago has had immensely positive effects for patients living with rare diseases. And similar regulations also do exist, obviously, in the US, in Japan, and also in other countries like Australia, South Korea, and even India. So prior to the EU incentive, there were just 8 therapies that were licensed to treat orphan conditions. Today, thanks to that exact regulation, there are around 190 approved orphan drugs, which have brought substantial clinical benefits to rare disease patients, reflecting the success of the incentive in fostering the development of treatments for rare indications. However, for 95% of around the 7,000 rare diseases, there is still no effective treatment available. It is therefore critical that there is continued focus on developing new treatments and improving existing therapies. And strong orphan regulation frameworks are needed for companies to invest. More than a third, approximately 35%, of granted marketing authorizations for orphan products are held by rare disease-focused companies. As we see a proposed revision to the EU regulation in Europe, it is critically important that the continued advancement of innovation is the main rationale behind the revision, and that any new regulation provide even more powerful incentives to all the stakeholders.
Now, coming to the end of this interview, I would like to pose my final question, Camilla. If you could change one of the discussed challenges that we just touched, what would it be?
Thank you, Christian, for that final question. And while there are many aspects to rare diseases that warrant change, the one area from our discussions today would be access. It is a huge injustice to rare disease patients that are often living with severe disability or at risk of dying to not have access to a therapy to treat their disease and improve their quality of life. In addition, patients should be part of the decision-making process in countries. Their views are very, very valuable. They are the ultimate experts, of course. And the isolated assessment of treatments with a narrow view on the impact on healthcare budgets falls often short of understanding the full value associated with the treatment. It is therefore really critical that all stakeholders work jointly and collaboratively to allow patients with rare diseases to benefit from innovations as quickly as possible. So, Christian, we need to consider new ways of addressing the uncertainty around cost effectiveness after approval to enable the access that you just spoke about.
Thank you very much, Camilla. You have given us a very valuable and detailed insight, and you have successfully encapsulated the intricacies of this fairly complicated issues. And so I remain in gratitude for your time and all the best wishes to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the brilliant questions.
I would like to summarize the key messages from the interview with Camilla Harder Hartvig. The process of assessing therapies via AMNOG is well defined and follows strict timelines, which ensures pharmaceutical companies have a predictable framework to work within. In other European countries, there often is a lengthy reimbursement process, unpredictability, and sometimes major delays resulting in patients needing to wait for years before they have access to a new therapy. This is critical in rare diseases when most therapies are first-of-a-kind treatment. Traditional health technology assessments are not designed to effectively or fairly assess the value of a given therapy for a rare disease. More needs to be done to ensure assessments take into consideration the uniqueness of orphan drugs, such as the small size of the patient population, but also the general lack of validated assessment tools for rare and ultra-rare diseases, as well as a lack of alternative therapies upon which to base any comparative evaluation. A balance must be found to ensure that new treatments are made available to patients safely, but also as quickly as possible. Registries are one option to strengthen the evidence base and to understand the full value of a new treatment for patients and the healthcare system. It is important that the setup and the approach to data collection do not pose a too high burden on treating physicians and patients and focus on those aspects that are most relevant. For 95% of the around 7,000 rare diseases, there still is no effective treatment available. It is critical that there is continued focus on developing new treatments and improving existing therapies. Strong orphan regulation frameworks are needed for companies to invest.